Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Get in the Driver's Seat. We're telling stories about leadership moments in small to mid-sized professional practices. I'm your host, Sandra Beckor, Practice Management Coach at Beckor Management. Today, I'm excited to introduce our guest, Deborah Gottesman, a pioneer in lighting design with a star-studded resume. My words, not hers. Deb's firm, Gottesman Associates, has their share of award-winning projects. And I noticed one project had 5 awards. I wonder how that feels to be collecting that 5th award. Is it like Spielberg at the Oscars? So Deborah has a unique entry point into lighting design as an electrical engineer with an MBA in real property. Welcome, Deb.
Great to be here, Sandra. Thank you for having me.
So from a background working for engineering firms and lighting manufacturers, you went off and started your own thing. And I remember that we sat down for a sushi lunch
We did.
one day, 17 years ago, both of us starting our own thing at the same time. But I don't remember exactly. Why don't you tell us why you started your own firm? What was the feeling at the time that helped you to be convinced this was the right thing for you?
Well, I'll tell you, there was no one aha moment. The situation was that I was a senior electrical engineer at one of the big firms here in Toronto. And I had gone on my second mat leave. I had my second child, and I was getting ready to come back to work after 12 months, which was had just been initiated by our government here that I had a full year off, except that the company I was going back to had shrunk from 120 people down to like 30, and they had no work. And so I ended up being downsized instead of returning to work.
Wow.
And so it was a little bit unexpected, but that's the way things roll. So, we negotiated the exit package to sort of give me some time to regroup and catch up, because when you're gone for a year, your contacts move around and you sort of got to get your head around this. And so when I started reaching out, I was finding that I could get myself some contracts, some project work, and some lighting design work, which I really loved. What was interesting, though, when I was going for employment opportunities, when I went into the engineering firms, they would say to me, "But aren't you a lighting designer?" And when I went into the lighting practices, they would say, "But you're an engineer." And so I found, after a couple of my own contracts in lighting design, I thought, you know what, this is really what I want to do. I'm loving this. And I love the flexibility that it was offering me. And so I thought, okay, maybe I'll give it a go on my own. But I can tell you that it took me almost a full year before I publicly said that I'm starting a practice. Here's the company name. I don't come from a line of entrepreneurs. My mother is a retired teacher. My father, who passed away a number of years ago, he was a partner in an engineering firm as well, but it wasn't his firm. He had worked his way up, through the ranks. So running your own business is a whole different scenario for someone like me. So that's how it all began. And I remember that lunch with you very well.
Yes, we were talking about all the possibilities. And
That's right.
So now, looking back at that, what were you able to do as a lighting consultant, independent with your own boutique firm, that you couldn't have done if you had gone back to work for one of those big engineering firms?
Well, one nice thing, which is probably the most obvious, is the flexibility. I had 2 young children at home. And if I had to take one to a doctor or pick them up early because they were sick, or, the things that happen with kids, that's okay, because after they went to bed, I could continue my work. I didn't have to ask permission. I was just able to manage my life.
But the world is becoming so much more attuned to those
Yes.
very important needs, the work-life balance and raising a young family. I'm glad you raised that here.
I really believe in work-life balance. I don't believe that it happens on a daily basis. So even though I was able to juggle things, it wasn't always, fun and games. There were lots of times, especially when you're starting out, that you have a lot of pressure and you're the chief cook and bottle washer, as my father used to say. You have to do everything. So sometimes that could be challenging, but that ultimately it's going to be of benefit to you in the long run. So it was a little bit easier to tolerate. And I also have to say I have a very supportive husband and partner. So that also really made it possible.
Well, it's a very interesting take on work-life balance, the way you put it, because there is no perfect work-life balance. And
I don't think so.
No, I think it's lovely the way you put it, because it makes this idea of entrepreneurship for anybody raising a young family or who has other priorities in their life, may not have to do with children, to understand that they can still have this. They can still run their own firm if that's what they want, and just understand that, you can carve out the space for those things that matter to you if you're willing to give in another way. So work the late nights when you've got the big project, or take that weekend for work when your spouse is able to support you and take the kids, to the country or whatever it is. And just
Exactly
bring that flexibility mindset to it.
Yeah. And I think, starting your own business, it doesn't happen overnight. It's really about putting one step in front of the other. And before you know it, you've walked a mile and you can go, gee, look at that. I actually did that and I've survived my first year, and let's see what I can do in the second year. I think you have to set realistic expectations so that you're not disappointed. So in my first year of practice, I thought if I could recoup a third of my salary, I would consider that a success. And I actually earned half my salary. But because I was self-employed, there are all kinds of other, write-offs. And in the end, it really had very little negative impact on our financial situation. I was actually really pleasantly surprised. So I think that would be some advice I would give anybody listening that was thinking about starting their own practice is, take it one step at a time, for this week or this month, this is what my goal is. And before you know it, you'll have achieved a number of them.
Right. And be prepared. I mean, I went through it myself, and you do need to be prepared for that slow build up.
Yes.
Because you're not going to be replacing your salary in that first year.
That's right. My husband says I'm an overnight success, 35 years in the making. So,
so looking at your portfolio, there's lots of eye candy and interesting achievements related to the green movement, with the zero, you say it, what's the category of the OAA headquarters project?
Going to net zero carbon.
And what does that mean challenge? For our listeners, explain, what does that mean?
What that means is there are different movements, but like, for example, the 2030 challenge is that there should be buildings should be net zero, meaning not using any gas, getting off of gas and reducing CO2 emissions. So while lighting is an electrical load and doesn't use gas, you still have to be able to have power on your site to use lighting. So you still want to minimize your lighting loads to be as efficient as possible, so that you need to generate as little electricity as well as possible.
Sounds like quite the achievement. And so in your work, you need to partner with clients, architects, builders, engineers, and consultants. I mean, just from this project alone, we can see how complicated it must be. And I see it in your LinkedIn posts. I see it in the way you describe your projects and your portfolio on your website, that you are always recognizing your partners. So your leadership style is, it seems to be, about being a reliable partner. And I just wanted to ask if you could shed some light on what makes those professional relationships work, because there's no way that you're always seeing eye to eye. You're going to run into conflict.
We often get asked, for example, lighting controls. We want them to be simple. We want them to be easy to use. And that's all possible. But the systems in the back of house are not simple to get there. So it's our job to educate them. So when you take that approach, you're not really going to be faced with a lot of conflict. What's there to conflict about? There's option A, there's option B, there's option C. Here are the ramifications. So we tend to keep the client's needs front and center. As an example, when we do certain projects, our first meeting can be a 2-hour meeting with the client. And we start with, why are you building? Not what are you building, why are you building? So we really get down, we really peel that onion, as they say, to get down to the real nitty gritty. So we can understand what their needs are, what their wants are, what their hopes are, what are their goals. And then we work towards that. And again, presenting the different options and letting them guide the way. I mean, you can often lead the client to the right solution based on what they've told you, as long as you pay attention and you listen carefully.
Well, and you started this by saying that you see your role as educator. So if you do that well, then the client is well informed and they can make good choices.
Right. And rather than, rolling your eyes at a client, to me, if they're not understanding, I'm not doing my job well enough and I have to find a better way. That's the way I look at it. Everyone, what's interesting about lighting is everybody's turned on lights or changed a light bulb or bought a light fixture, right? So everybody has some experience with lighting. What they don't understand, though, is, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much. Lighting affects, we always say, lighting affects how we feel, how we perform, and how we adapt. And it's not about picking a pretty light fixture. It's about understanding the human brain, about visibility and perception, and how the non-visual effects of light. Like, for example, the same way that your ear is responsible for hearing and balance, the eye is responsible for vision, but also for entraining our circadian rhythms, which means, how does your body know that there's a 24-hour clock and when you should be sleeping and when you should be awake? So, for example, people in long-term care, if they're not getting outside or sitting by windows enough, they can have what's called a free running circadian rhythm, where it might be a 25-hour system. So in a few days, they're actually sleeping in the day and they're awake at night, which is a problem for them, for their health, but also a problem for the people trying to manage the situation. That's how important lighting is. So there's an awful lot to educate the clients on. And that's where we really, add the value on things like that.
That's a nice little example of how you educate. I mean, I just got educated. Thank you. And it sounds like one of your strategies, probably intuitively, to avoid conflict is to just get on the same page right from the start.
Well, exactly. I can honestly say we haven't had, a situation where the project is finished and the clients are, unhappy with, A, B, or C, because they've been part of that decision-making process. I once heard a really interesting interview with Frank Gehry, and, he was asked, how do you get your client to buy into a Bilbao, that kind of really unique design? And his answer was, well, you don't start with Bilbao. You start with, why are you building? What are you doing? What are your goals? And they become part of the process.
Nice.
So I learned a lot from that interview. I think that was a real education for me.
So then it's basically their idea too.
Exactly. And you talked about recognizing others on a project. I mean, our big joke is, we'll design the lighting, you can design the building around us, right? Like, it doesn't work that way. We're not in a vacuum. We all have to work together. And again, if you keep saying, what is best for the client? What is best for the client? And if that means I have to do extra work because that's what's going to be best for the client to make, X happen, then that's what we'll do.
So that
And who can argue with that? Right?
Well,
who can argue with that? We're all here. We all have the same client.
What if they have a different view of what's best for the client? The associates that you work with, not at your firm, but let's say the engineer, the builder, the architect, other consultants, let's say they have a different view of what's best for the client. How do you handle that?
I guess the same approach would be to say, okay, well, let's present this to the client, that A gives you this and B gives you that. And again, it's up for them to decide.
Does this happen?
Oh.
That you run into this situation?
I'm sure it has, but nothing is really standing out in my mind because I don't see conflict. Well, I guess conflict has its negative connotations. I don't see disagreement or difference of opinion as a bad thing. Even with my associates that I work with, I'll look at maybe a design and I'll say, okay, convince me why we should do this. I don't say, I don't like this, or, that's bad. I mean, there's 100 ways you can design a space. So it's really about, convince me, tell me what you're thinking.
You're bringing curiosity to those partnerships.
I try to approach it in that way.
Mm-hmm. And then that eventually builds trust.
Well, I think that builds a lot of things. I think it builds trust. It builds a stronger relationship. It teaches people how to defend their ideas, which is really important in the world of architectural design and all the subconsultants, because we're dealing with some very strong people, and you have to be able to manage that.
Yes, so my undergrad is architecture. I'm familiar.
Yes, you are.
Every Monday was crit day, and every Sunday night was an all-nighter getting ready for that pitch.
You bet.
You never forget. All right, so it is meaningful work, lighting design, and that little story you told about how being near the window affects your circadian rhythm is part of that. So can you give us an example of how your work is meaningful to you?
Oh boy. I love what I do. I'm very passionate about it too. And I would say it's meaningful in a number of ways. I'd say the first piece is the energy efficient piece. So energy efficiency. So, people that aren't aware of what lighting design is will typically, pepper a ceiling with pot lights, give lots of light. And that's when they do what I say is illuminate everything and notice nothing in particular. But nobody complains because everyone can see. So the problem with that is that you're typically overlighting and wasting energy. So I love that our designs are typically very efficient. We only provide exactly what's needed. We don't overdo it. And we're independent consultants. So we don't sell product. I don't care if, I don't care, but it makes no difference to me if I'm specifying good, better, or best. I just want it to be at least good. That's up to the client to decide their price point. But I'm not compelled to put too much in for that reason, right? So the energy efficiency piece is certainly a very meaningful piece. There's also, the client satisfaction, knowing that our work, in the end, long after we walk away, we're leaving our clients with these wonderful spaces. I mean, lighting is like the final finish, right? You'll put lots of money into your tile and your onyx and your stones and your carpets and your textures and your colors. But if you don't light it properly, you're never going to see it properly. So I love that when we're finally done, and we're the last piece that gets installed too, budgets are crumbling, right? It's the end of the project. That's when the lights are going in. And when they finally turn it on and see how fabulous the space is, and they get to live with that forevermore. So that's very meaningful. I've had clients say to me, you've ruined my hotel experience for life because they're so badly lit usually. And now I know the difference.
So you graduated from electrical engineering at Western in 1986.
Yes.
It's on your LinkedIn, so I don't feel guilty saying that.
Right. No secret.
And the industry looked a lot different then. Nowadays there's a lot more diversity. There's a lot more empowerment of women, but not so much at the top. However, I still have clients struggling with bringing women into leadership roles. But you broke through many glass ceilings in your career. And is there anything that you can share with us about some pivotal moments that you feel proud of?
It was quite an isolating experience for me in that way. And then even when I started my engineering career, there weren't very many women. I remember sitting around at a meeting, and the project manager at the construction site said, well, we'll let Deborah give her report first because she's the prettiest.
Wow.
Meaning
that was normal then.
It was normal, but talk about an uncomfortable situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of taking it in the other direction, that I got to go first because I was a woman.
Yeah.
That I don't know. I didn't really appreciate that at the time. And I remember talking to him afterwards saying, I know you meant well, but you don't have to call me out for that, trying to be sensitive about it. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was a really tough situation. And there was one job site, I even wrote a small article about it many years ago, about what it was like to be a woman in engineering, where I talked about this, so I was on the P3 level of the parkade, walking to the electricians, their workshop, because that was, set up way, in the bowels of the building. And the electrical project manager was terrific and taught me a lot. And, we had a really great, mutual respect for one another. But we get to the electrician's workshop, and it's plastered floor to ceiling with, at the time, the Sunshine Girls. I don't know that they still do that anymore. I don't read that paper. But talk about an uncomfortable situation. You're, a 20-something woman, you're surrounded by men, you're in the bowels of a building, deep down, and you're faced with naked women. And that was a huge battle, which I actually undertook. I was tough, and I wasn't going to put up with that. And it got to the point of the president of my company writing to the president of the electricians company and saying that, those pictures have to come down. It's 1989. It's time for those pictures to come down. So, there were situations like that. But, I guess I'm tough, and I was lucky enough that also along the way there were many people that were, that taught me things, that were mentors, that took me under their wing. And you sort of focus on that rather than the negative experiences to get you through. I would say today in lighting, there are many women in the lighting field, either as lighting designers, or in lighting sales. There are many women architects I've had the privilege of working with. So it's, in fact, I'm thinking of a couple of projects where the women now sometimes outnumber the men. Mm-hmm. So things have certainly changed, I think, for the better. We're not 100% there yet, but we're certainly seeing some positive movement.
It's interesting. The story you're telling is an example of using your voice, even when the other people may not want to hear what you have to say. You may ruffle some feathers along the way, but doing it in a way that is authentic.
It's usually about telling someone, this is the way it makes me feel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to argue with that. You were talking about how to deal with conflict. And now that we're talking about this, those were much more intense conflicts than
Mm-hmm.
somebody wanting to pick, the solution that I least was in favor of. You know what I mean?
Right.
That to me is not a conflict. That's nothing. So maybe that kind of toughened me up for for running my own practice.
Wow. And you were so young at the time to deal with
At that
those
time.
issues.
Yeah.
You may not have realized it at the time, but I mean, as an outsider looking at it, I can say that it seems that you affected, the way things moved. You were one voice, and there were many voices that pushed this industry in that direction. But look at where we are now. You had influence. You weren't alone, but you played a role and you had
Well,
influence.
and as I said, there were enough enlightened people and kind people. Like I remember two sales reps in particular when I was a junior designer at my first engineering job that were treated me with the same respect as if I was a partner. One has since passed away, but the other one I'm still, to this day, I'm in touch with, and I will take his call no matter where I am in the world.
Wow.
Because you remember people like that. What do they say? People may not remember your name, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
Yes. And that does go back to partnership being at the core of really good leadership style.
Yeah.
So you've made it through many milestones. Do you remember any challenges that felt like it was difficult to get through it? You weren't sure you'd be able to get through it? I mean, since you started your business.
Well, more recently, we've just gone through some growing pains. At some point in any business, I guess that's growing, you sort of realize that you can't do it all and you can't do it by yourself. So I've been lucky through the years to have some really terrific associates, and that number is growing. And I've been lucky to find some good people so that I can now focus on, maybe some design direction, but, more the oversight, the quality assurance, bringing in the business. But that was a real shift for me. That was a really tough shift because, at my core, I'm a designer and very passionate about the way I design. So, having to open your mind, like I said, to say to people, okay, I know there's more than one way to do this. Convince me, right? So that was, I say that and it sounds like, oh, that's a great idea, but I'm not saying that that's easy for someone like me. I tend to like to control the situation. So that is, that's been a challenge for me, but it's starting to pay off, as you know, and I'm really excited for what the future brings.
You're getting through your growing pains.
Well, slowly but surely.
Well, and the way you put it really is the heart of why delegation is so difficult for professionals and for managers generally, because you do have to give up control. And there's a lot of trust involved in that process.
Yes.
You also mentioned quality control, and that really is one of the ways to make it work.
Yes. It's the oversight.
So the lighting industry seems to have gone through many changes. I mean, I remember when a light bulb was a light bulb.
Yeah, say, so do I.
We need a light bulb. Go to the store and get a light bulb. And now you need the specs, and you actually really should save the actual light bulb so that you can get the exact right one. So I imagine as a professional, it has changed a lot. What are your hopes about the future for the industry?
Oh my goodness. I have so many hopes. Some of them pretty technical. I don't think we need to get into the details, but for example, lighting controls, everyone's seen the LEDs flicker and they don't dim properly, or they get to half and they pop off. That's all about the lighting controls and the coordination thereof. So I'm hoping that we continue to be making strides in that. That'll make my life easier. But in terms of changes that I'd like to see, the research on on circadian lighting and how lighting impacts our health. There's no magic bullet study that says you should do this. There's a study that says in long-term care, this was the impact when we did certain things. And in schools, we have seen these kinds of results. So we just need more research that will hopefully get us to the point where we can actually say, and be able to sell some of these new ideas to our clients, because they do take some investment.
Well, it's interesting that you're mentioning the research related to the circadian rhythms. And, the culture these days of our Western world is very much focused on wellness and mental health. And I'm wondering, do you think that if we get smarter about how lighting affects our circadian rhythms, we can help reduce things like SAD? Isn't that what it's called when you're
seasonal affective disorder? Yes.
Yeah,
yes, absolutely. Lighting can help that. I mean, listen, the best thing for seasonal affective disorder is to get outside in the morning and get those 490 nanometer wavelength light, into your eyes. That's the best thing you can do. But practically speaking, most of us are not in a position where we can do that for any length of time. So certainly lighting can help with that. It can help. Lighting has been shown to impact our health in terms of contracting diseases. It's also been shown to help in the healing of certain diseases. About getting the right kind of light at different times of day can help the absorption of certain medications or certain treatments.
I know it's early days and your passion is very strong, but do you have any ideas from now what you would like, to leave behind as your legacy in this field?
I guess there's two things. One is all these great spaces that we've created that people get to live with. I think there's some legacy in that and showing what can be done. And that makes me very proud on many of our projects. And I guess the second thing, my late father used to say, the only thing you really have in this world is your name. So protect it and build it. And I'd like to be known as someone with a good reputation for, working hard, for being kind to people, and still being able to get the job done and doing it well. So that's the kind of legacy I would like to leave.
That's lovely. And it also speaks to the entrepreneurship piece of it, because you have a lot more say in what your legacy is going to be as a professional when you're running your own ship.
Well, that's right. It's my name on the letterhead. It's my name on the door. So, yeah.
If you are interested in learning more about lighting design from Deborah, our guest and a leader in the field, go to Gottesman.ca, Gottesman.ca. And before we sign off, Deb, can you give listeners who may be getting ready for renovations or building projects a tip? How can an architect or homeowner decide if their project is suitable for bringing on a lighting design expert such as yourself?
Well, I would say that most projects can't afford not to have a lighting designer. I can tell you that on a number of projects that there is some decision or some direction that we take with the lighting that ends up saving the client so much money by not overlighting. I mean, what's the capital cost of those fixtures that weren't installed? And, the installation costs, the continued operating costs. So I would just say that it should be considered because in the end, the results are so much better. And in the end, it actually costs less overall. So I'm afraid, I like to talk about the value that we bring, and it still comes down to money, right? It's not, just pay a whole lot of fees and you don't get much for it. You really do. The space looks much better. All that effort you put into the design is shown in its best light, if you will, pun intended. and inevitably there are decisions that are made that will save a lot of headache, a lot of time and energy down the road.
In terms of maintenance, in terms of energy costs, that's the savings.
That's the savings. And, I one of my old mentors used to say to me, it's funny how clients have the ability to pay for it the second time, meaning they get it wrong the first time,
Right.
And then they have to change it the second time.
Yeah.
And we've been involved in a number of projects like that where, I just hate my lighting. I just hate it. I need some help. And then it becomes a second project. So you can't avoid all that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and the other cost saving you mentioned was just not buying more fixtures than you need.
Exactly. Like, design fees are usually, let's say it's 10% of the cost of building the project. But the impact that we have, for every hour that I spend, I can have an impact on 10 hours for the construction team. So it's this small proportion of cost that has a massive impact. And I guess that's what I'm trying to get at.
Mm-hmm. Simplify and do what you need to do, nothing more.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Deb, for your time and your insights. You've been listening to Get in the Driver's Seat, stories about leadership moments in small to mid-sized professional practices. I'm your host, Sandra Beckor, Practice Management Coach at Beckor Management.